Hope you guys are enjoying the sunshine, enjoying August. My name's Tim, one of the pastors here, and so today we are kind of continuing our series looking at the life of Elijah that we discover in the Old Testament, more specifically in the book of 1 Kings. And today's story is incredible. It's an incredible story. It involves a dramatic showdown up a mountain where like two gods are pitted against each other and there can only be one winner. So it's a great story. But before we get there, let's just kind of like back up a little bit so we can kind of set the scene to kind of understand like why is this happening? How have we got there? The beginning chapters of 1 Kings is, as its name describes, it is a book that charts the account of different kings of Israel from King David, who was a good king. God actually called him a man after my own heart. But when he died, kind of what happened is there were successive kings that came that were like worse than the ones that came before them. 7 kings in total. And the 7th king is this king called Ahab, that is reigning at the time of Elijah, that is in the story that we read about today. And it says this about King Ahab. It says, I'm caught up, sorry. It says, Ahab, son of Amoriah, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. He married Jezebel, daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and began to serve Baal and worship him. He set up an altar for Baal in the temple of Baal, and he built in Samaria. Ahab also made an Asherah pole and did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger than did all the kings of Israel before him. Wow. You know, Israel has had some bad kings, but Ahab is like the worst of the worst. God's first commandment to the Israelites, way back in their history, in the time of Moses, when Moses went up the mountain, got the 10 commandments, first commandment was this: you shall not have any other gods before me. And what Ahab has done is not only marry into a family that is worshipping other gods, but he's adopted those gods into his nation's culture and is actively encouraging the Israelites to worship them. And Elijah, a prophet of the God of Israel, who Ahab has provoked, goes to the king and in a bold move announces, he says this: as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my command. And what Elijah says comes true. There is no rain for the next 3 years. We're told the famine is severe. There's no water. There's not enough water for crops to grow or cattle to graze. And then one day, the word of the Lord comes to Elijah again and says to him, go and present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land. And so off he goes and has this meeting with King Ahab. And this is where we're going to pick up the story. It's in 1 Kings chapter 18. We're going to start from verses 19. It's a great story. It's quite a long story. We're going to kind of look at it in chunks. He says this to King Ahab: you have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals. Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. So Ahab sent word throughout all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. So the stage is set in the middle of a national crisis when there is a famine in the land. Elijah asks that everyone meets him on a mountain: the king, the prophets of Baal, and all the people of Israel. You know, everything that you read about in the Bible is based in history. You know, Baal was a god that ancient people groups worshipped. In fact, we have some images that kind of have survived this day. Here he is up on the screen here. He was known as the Lord of the storms, wielding power over the rain, over thunder, over lightning, and often he is depicted with a lightning bolt in his hand. And this is the God that Ahab has built a temple for, a God that supposedly controls the weather. And Elijah summons everyone to meet him on a mountain. You might say, well, why a mountain? Why does he just kind of gather them all in the town? Why go up a mountain? Well, two things. One, when people went to speak to God, they did send up a mountain. It's like a symbolic way of reaching up into the heavens. Moses did it when he went up the mountain. Elijah's doing it here now. But there's more going on than just that, I think. Because in the Hebrew language, Mount Carmel is translated as garden mountain or vineyard mountain. It's a cultivated piece of land. So what's happening here is that Ahab has provoked the Lord to such an extent that he is directly challenging the God that he has introduced into their culture, the rain god, by turning off the rain. And then Elijah is inviting everyone to a garden, a place whose existence and flourishing is only possible because of what has been turned off. There are three groups that are on the mountain. Group number one is a size of 450, and that's the prophets of Baal. 450. They are fully committed to worshipping the rain god. That's group number one. Group number two is just made up of one person. Actually, it's a very small group of one. And that's Elijah. And he is fully committed to worshipping and following the God of Israel. And then you have this third group that is made up of a vast number of Israelites who it would appear are not really committed to anything. Because Elijah now turns his attention to them and he says this. He says, how long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. In other words, the word waver in the Hebrew language, it can be translated in different ways. In the NIV, which is what I'm reading, it says waver. But there are other translations, like the ESV, that use the word limping or dancing. It's the same word. What he's basically saying to them is you can't straddle two opinions. Stop trying to dance or limp or waver between following the God of Israel and following other gods that have been introduced to your culture. Elijah says, stop being so indecisive, in other words. Don't spend your life like sitting on the fence, not really fully committing to anything in particular. It's a complete waste of your life. Either follow the gods that have been introduced to your culture or follow the God of Israel. But you cannot follow both. You must choose. And the challenge to the Israelites is a challenge that echoes down each generation all the way to us. How long will you waver between two opinions? It's a highly provocative question. But if, like me, you're a Christian, it's worth asking ourselves from time to time, how am I doing? Does my life reflect one that is fully committed to God, or have other things crept in and made me kind of waver, limp, dance between different things? You know, it's easy as a Christian, particularly in the West, in the culture that we live in, where there's so many things vying for our attention. The God of Western civilization could be summed up as the God of more. More money, more possessions, more leisure, more entertainment, more status, more significance, more followers. And it's easy to get caught up on it. I know it is, because I do. And you tell yourself there's no harm in wanting more, but the challenge is trying to get the balance right. Because before I know it, I'm limping between the two. So I want to follow the gods of this culture. I want more. I spend all my time thinking about, I'm scrolling on Vinted. I'm looking on eBay. I'm looking on Rightmove at houses I'm never going to move to. I'm scrolling websites of bikes I can't afford. I'm spending all my time doing this. But at the same time, I'm trying to follow God too. And I end up doing this dance, this limping between the two. I'm struck at how uncompromising the gospel is. Jesus said things like, you cannot serve God and money, but I try. He said, don't store up treasures for yourself on earth, but store up for yourself treasures in heaven, but I want to do both. He said he went as far as saying, if you are not anyone who is not prepared to give up everything to follow me cannot be my disciple. I'm still working on that one. He's saying following the Lord will involve making a choice. If you try to commit your life to following multiple things, of wavering between the two, what will happen is you'll never actually achieve anything for anything. Which side of the fence are you on? Are you fully committed to following God? Or are you trying to fill your life by following him and following other gods? Maybe you've been coming here and coming to church for a few weeks now and finding everything really interesting, which is fantastic. So glad that you're here, but there will come a point when you'll need to make a decision. Are you going to go from wavering thinking, which one am I going to go to fully committing to follow God? It's a big decision because it will cost you something. It might even cost you everything. And when Elijah asks the people, what are you going to do? It says this, but the people said nothing. It's a massive tumbleweed moment. They just fold their arms, been invited up to the mountain, they think something's going to happen, and they're just going to wait to see what happens next. And the story continues, says this, then Elijah said to them, I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us. Let Baal's prophet choose one for themselves and let them cut it into pieces and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood and not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by fire, he is God. And all the people said, what you say is good. So they all go, that's a good idea. Let's do that. It's quite a suggestion. It's pretty unconventional actually to put the Lord your God to the test. In fact, we're told not to do it. But on this occasion, it feels like God is in on it. And for those who are wavering between what to follow and what to commit their lives to, a simple test. Whoever turns up, then logically that is the God to follow. And the odds are not great. There are 450 prophets to call out to their God. But there's just Elijah on his own. I don't know about you, but I like it when the odds are stacked up in my favor a bit more. When I can look out at the opposition and think, yep, I've got this. The challenge in following God is that is not how he operates. What you discover as you flick through the pages of Scripture is that God specializes at working with people who are at a disadvantage. Whether that's Gideon facing a vast army and God's whittled down his to just 300 men, or whether that's the teenager David staring at a giant Goliath and he's only got 5 stones and Goliath's got this massive sword, or whether that's Daniel locked in a den full of hungry lions, or whether that is Jesus nailed on a cross. God likes it when the odds are worse because the victory is so much sweeter. It leaves no one in any doubt that anyone had anything to do with it other than God. And in following him, he invites us to cultivate a trust in him for things that look impossible. To be comfortable when we are outnumbered and confident when, on paper, success looks unlikely. In Elijah, he had found such a man, and he is always on the lookout for other people that are happy to live with those types of odds. The story continues. Elijah said to the prophet of Baal, "Choose one of the bulls and prepare it first, since there were so many of you. Call on the name of your God, but do not light the fire." So they took a bull given them and prepared it, and they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. "Baal, answer us," they shouted. But there was no response. No one answered, and they danced around the altar they had made. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. "Shout louder," he said. "Surely he is God. Perhaps he's deep in thought or busy or traveling. Maybe he's sleeping and you must awaken him." So they shouted all the louder, and they slashed themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until blood flowed. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time for the evening sacrifice. But there was no response, no answer, no one paid attention. When their God doesn't answer, Elijah gets a bit sassy. I like it. Maybe he's busy, he says, which in some translations, again, if you've got an ESV, the translation for busy in the Hebrew is maybe he is relieving himself. So have a look at it in your Bible. It's like maybe he's going to the toilet, guys. I love that. Maybe you need to try and wake him up. Maybe you need to try a bit harder. Maybe he's out somewhere. You get the impression that Elijah is enjoying this moment. But despite their best efforts of shouting and dancing and even doing some cutting themselves, which is quite prevalent in some cultures, worshiping foreign gods, we're told twice there was no response. No one answered. No one paid any attention. So now the big moment. This is Elijah's go. And the story continues. It says, "Then Elijah said to all the people, 'Come here to me.' And they came to him. And he repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. And Elijah took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes descended from Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, 'Your name shall be Israel.' With the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he dug a trench around it large enough to hold 2 shells of seed. He arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. And then he said to them, 'Fill 4 large jugs of water and pour it onto the offering and onto the wood.' 'Do it again,' he said, and they did it again. 'Do it a third time,' he ordered, and they did it a third time. The water ran down the altar and filled the trench." Now, if the odds weren't already bad, Elijah just kind of ups the ante and makes it even worse. It's easy to look at this and think this is Elijah just wanting to prove a point that his God is bigger than their God by making it super impossible. But as much as that is true, that his God is bigger than their God, there's more going on here than Elijah just kind of showing off in many ways. A large trench is dug, ready for the water. 4 jugs are filled and poured over the wood 3 times. That's 12 jugs of water. Part of what is going on here is symbolic. There are 12 tribes of Israel. And at the moment, they're a little bit fractured. They're not that as unified in the way that God had intended them to be. There's some division. But in this moment, there is a pouring onto the offering for each one of the tribes. But it's more than that. Think about the setting for a moment. This is happening in the middle of a famine. There has not been any rain for 3 years. Water is scarce. Cattle can't graze. Plants can't grow. And from somewhere and somehow, Elijah has managed to get hold of a vast amount of water and is pouring it onto the sacrifice of God. You know, sacrifices in the Old Testament were a way of demonstrating your devotion to God. Now, years before this moment, King David, he once wanted to do a sacrifice to God. And someone offered to give him something to put on the sacrifice. You can read about it in 2 Samuel chapter 24, verse 24. He gets offered something to put on the sacrifice for free. And David's response is quite telling. He says this, I will not offer a burnt offering to the Lord my God that has cost me nothing. That's what's going on here. Elijah, he takes a scarce commodity that is precious, of huge value, and he pours it outrageously, extravagantly, as a way of demonstrating his devotion to God. I will not put anything on the altar that has not cost me anything. You know, first Elijah tells the people to stop wavering and make a decision about who they are going to follow. And then secondly, he models to them what being fully devoted to God looks like. Worshipping God is not about offering him what is easy. Following God is a call to pour everything out. Everything that is precious, everything that is costly onto the sacrifice and say, Lord, you can have it all. Not just the leftovers, not just stuff I've managed to pick up for free. Whatever it costs me, God, I'll hold nothing back. But in joy, I put it all on the sacrifice as a sign of my devotion to you. There's this story in Luke's gospel where Jesus is hanging around outside the temple and he witnesses some rich people, and it says they put some money into the offering out of their great wealth. And then he notices a widow come along, and she just pops 2 small copper coins into the offering. And he gathers the disciples around and he said, you see that? You see what just happened there? Those rich people just gave to God out of what they had to spare. But he says, she out of her poverty has given to God everything she has to live on. You know, Elijah didn't put on the sacrifice what they had as a nation. He put on the sacrifice what they didn't have. He gave out of their poverty everything, and in effect says, God, have it all. The story continues. At the time of the sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I'm your servant and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so those people will know that you, Lord, are God, and you are turning their hearts back again. You know, I love the contrast between the prophets of Baal, like shouting, dancing, screaming, frantically prophesying, cutting themselves, you know, and what Elijah did. You know, Jesus once said this. He said, don't be like the pagans, which he means don't be like these people that are worshiping foreign gods. Don't be like them. He says, they think they will be heard because of their many words. Elijah is just standing in front of thousands of people, and he has this like quiet confidence about him. And he doesn't ham things up. He doesn't play to the crowd and like whip them all up into a frenzy. Here we go, guys, come on, woo! But he quietly and confidently, just short prayer to God. You know, if you ever think that you're going to have to pray elaborate prayers, long-winded prayers, use certain words in order for God to answer you, then this story says that's not true. What counts is the heart that you come towards God with and a quiet confidence in who you're speaking to. Because we read this. Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones and the soil, and it also licked up the water in the trench. And when the people saw this, they fell prostrate on the ground and cried, "The Lord is God. The Lord is God." How long will you waver between two opinions? After witnessing that, not very long. They've gone from arms folded, sitting on the fence, quiet as a mouse, to prostrate before God, saying, He is the Lord. He is the Lord. And then Elijah commanded them, "Seize the prophets of Baal. Don't let anyone get away." Seize them, and Elijah had them brought down to the Kishon Valley and slaughtered there. You know, I wish this wasn't in there. And I was thinking, well, I might just breeze over that. But we got to deal with difficult passages of Scripture, right? God is God. He can take life and He can save life. That is entirely up to Him. And in the Old Testament, what you have often is when people set themselves up against God, there's almost like this immediate consequence. You're going to take them out. That's kind of what happens in the Old Testament often. God is judge. There's a price to pay. When we get to the New Testament, there's a definite shift. Jesus comes, and instead of coming to take life, we're told He comes to give life. We're told to love our enemies. We're told to pray for those who persecute us. There's a shift that happens. God can still take life like that if He wants to. But there's a change. But that doesn't mean God's got soft on sin. There will one day be a judgment. And God will one day, all of us will stand before Him and be judged according to what we've done. And those that have been opposed to God, there will be an eternal separation, a death that just goes on and on and on. There will still be a judgment. It's not clear in this passage, actually, whether God initiated it. It doesn't say, and the Lord said to Elijah, "Go and have them all killed." It actually says Elijah commanded, "Go and have them killed." He may have just been thinking this is the right thing to do. Whatever the reason, it's clear that with Jesus and Christianity, a new era is ushered in. Christianity is not to be advanced by force or by killing people, by taking life. It is to be advanced through giving our lives, even giving our lives to people that are in opposition to God. And judgment is left to God to do. God shows up. Baal has been exposed as a false god. The people have turned to God. And now there's only one more thing to happen for the rain God promised to come. And it says this, "And Elijah said to Ahab, 'Go eat and drink, for there is a sound of heavy rain.' So Ahab went off to eat and drink, but Elijah, he climbed up to the top of Mount Carmel, and he bent down to the ground, and he put his face between his knees." He's praying in this moment. "Go and look towards the sea," he told his servant. And he went up and he looked. "There's nothing there," he said. 7 times Elijah said, "Go back." The 7th time the servant reported, "There's a small cloud, a cloud as small as a man's hand, just like rising from the sea." So Elijah said, "Go and tell Ahab, hitch up your chariot and go down before the rain stops you." It's a curious thing. You know, God promises the rain at the beginning, but it doesn't automatically happen. It took just one short prayer for the fire to come, But now it seems to take Elijah several times of getting on his knees and praying and looking and praying and looking until the rain comes. You know, one thing this tells us is there is no set formula for how to pray and how to have answers to prayer. There's no formula in the Bible that says if you say these words and you do this, then this will happen. 7 times. It's happening in different ways here. But I think there's more happening than that. God takes Elijah out of a public moment into a private moment. And he has a private moment with Elijah. He's already promised the rain. And Elijah gets down and prays and he doesn't see it. And he gets down and prays and he doesn't see it, gets down and prays. And I think God is testing Elijah. And in this moment, in this quiet moment when he's on his own, he's saying, how much do you trust me? How much do you want to see the things that I've promised? How ready are you to give up? Or are you willing to keep pursuing me in prayer for what I've promised? And every time, Elijah just gets down again. You know, I think it's the same question he asks us. You know, we all live with promises of God that haven't been fulfilled, that haven't been answered. And God, I think, sometimes comes to us and says, I want to see you pursue me for this. How much do you want to see it happen? I'm going to pray again, God. I'm going to pray again. I'm not going to give up until I see it. I think that's what's happening here. And then finally we read this. Meanwhile, the sky grew black with clouds. The wind rose and a heavy rain started to fall. The rain's come. What God promised would happen. The prophets that were worshipping the gods of their culture have been defeated. God has been seen as the one true God. People are worshipping him, and the famine has gone. It's an amazing story. Why don't we stand together? We're going to worship and respond to God in this moment. I wonder if the band come up. It's an amazing story. So rich, so much stuff in it. I don't know if we just take a moment before we worship God together, just to close our eyes, quieten our hearts, and think about all that we've just heard in that story. I wonder what stood out to you. Maybe for some of you, this is true for me, it's like this idea of not wavering, about being fully committed to God. And maybe God's just stirring your heart in this moment. And maybe there's some self-reflection going on. It needs to go on. God, I want to be all in. Maybe it's about the sacrifice. How much are you willing to pour on the sacrifice of God? Are you willing to put it all on? Maybe in this moment, just need to talk to God about that. Maybe it's about being at a disadvantage. So the odds of things are stacked up against you, and God's calling you to say, I want you to be okay with that. I want you to trust me when the opposition looks enormous. Or maybe it's just God quietly coming and saying, I want you to keep pursuing me in prayer for the things I promised.